Imagine that investigators are searching a house after a serious crime. During the search, they discover a handgun hidden inside a cupboard. The investigator photographs the weapon in its original position, carefully collects it, identifies it as an exhibit, packages it appropriately, seals the package, and records the details. Later, the weapon is transferred to the evidence store. From there, it is sent to the forensic laboratory. At the laboratory, a forensic expert examines the firearm for fingerprints, biological traces, markings, mechanical condition, and other relevant evidence. The examination produces an important finding. But now imagine that someone in court asks a very simple question. How do you know that the firearm examined by the forensic expert is the same firearm that was recovered from that cupboard? And another question follows. Who had possession of it between the crime scene and the laboratory? And then was the package sealed throughout? Where was it stored? Was there any possibility of substitution or tampering? These questions may sound simple, but they go to the very foundation of forensic evidence, and the system that allows investigators and courts to answer these questions is called chain of custody. In today's video, we are going to understand chain of custody from the basics. We will look at its meaning, importance, documentation, handling, transfer of evidence, storage, sealing, maintaining integrity, and we will also understand some interesting examples. So instead of simply memorizing a definition for UGC NET, let's follow the journey of evidence from the crime scene to the courtroom. Let's begin with the basic definition. Chain of custody is the documented history of the possession, handling, movement, storage, examination, and transfer of evidence from the time it is collected until its final disposition. In very simple language, chain of custody answers 5 important questions. What is the evidence? Who handled it? When was it handled or transferred? Where was it kept? What happened to it? Think of chain of custody as complete biography of a piece of evidence. For example, imagine that investigators recover a spent cartridge case from a crime scene. The cartridge case is collected by an investigating officer. It is assigned an exhibit number. It is packaged and sealed. It is deposited in secure evidence storage. Later, it is transferred to an authorized person for transportation. The forensic laboratory receives it. A firearms expert examines it. The expert records the findings. Eventually, the exhibit may be produced before the court. Every stage in that journey forms part of the chain. So remember this formula. Chain of custody is equal to continuity plus documentation plus accountability plus integrity. Now let's ask the important question. Why do we need a chain of custody at all? Because forensic evidence can be extremely powerful. A fingerprint can connect a person with an object. A DNA profile can associate biological material with an individual. A toxicological finding can establish the presence of a substance. A firearm examination can associate a cartridge with a particular weapon. But before a court can confidently consider such evidence, there must be a reliable connection between the originally recovered exhibit and the exhibit examined by the forensic expert. Let's take a different example. Suppose investigators recover a mobile phone from a suspect's room. The phone may contain photographs, messages, call records, or other digital information relevant to the investigation. The device is seized and sent for forensic examination, but imagine that there is no proper record showing who possessed the phone after seizure. Someone could then ask, how do we know that the device examined in the laboratory was the same device seized during the investigation? That is precisely the type of question chain of custody is designed to address. It provides a documented trial connecting recovery, storage, transfer, laboratory, examination, court. It also helps reduce concerns about tampering, substitution, contamination, loss, unauthorized access, improper handling, and unexplained gaps in custody. So, chain of custody is not merely administrative paperwork, it is an important part of maintaining confidence in the identity and integrity of evidence. Think of a chain of custody as an evidence journey. Here is a very easy way to understand the concept. Imagine a question document suspected to be forged. An investigator recovers the document. The document is photographed and identified. It is placed in suitable protective packaging. The package is sealed, the evidence is entered into the appropriate records, it is stored securely. Later, it is transferred to a forensic document laboratory. The laboratory receives the sealed package. The document examiner examines handwriting, signatures, ink, paper characteristics, or other relevant features. The findings are recorded. Now ask yourself, can we trace the document from the moment it was recovered until the moment it was examined? If the answer is yes, we have documented evidentiary trial. That is the essence of chain of custody. The chain begins at a crime scene. This is one of the most important points to remember. Chain of custody does not begin when evidence reaches the forensic laboratory. It begins when the evidence is collected or otherwise taken into official custody. Suppose investigators find tiny glass fragments near a broken window. Those fragments may contain valuable information, but if they are collected carelessly, mixed with unrelated fragments or contaminated with material from another location, their evidentiary value may be affected. Therefore, investigators must identify the evidence, document its location, collect it using appropriate method, package it suitably, assign an appropriate identification or exhibit number, and most importantly, record what was done. The first person who takes custody of evidence becomes the first important link in the chain. After collection, the evidence needs to remain identifiable. Imagine a crime scene containing 3 glass fragments, 2 cigarette butts, a footwear impression, 1 broken electronic device. If these items are simply placed into unmarked packets, how will the laboratory know which exhibit came from which location? That is why device identification is important. Each exhibit should have appropriate identifying information according to the applicable procedures. This may include case number, exhibit number, description of the item, date and place of collection, and other relevant details. The goal is simple. The identity of the evidence should remain clear throughout its journey. Now we come to one of the most important topics for UGC NET, that is documentation. Chain of custody should not depend on someone's memory, it should be supported by records. Depending on the agency and type of evidence, documentation may include seizure or recovery records, evidence labels, seal information, forwarding documents, property or evidence registers, laboratory receipt records, examination records, and records showing subsequent movement or final disposition. A proper record should generally allow us to determine what was collected, who collected it, when was it collected, who received it, when was it transferred, where was it stored, who transported it, when did the laboratory receive it, what examination was conducted. This creates accountability. Recent judicial discussion has emphasized the importance of the documenting the identity of the person collecting the evidence, subsequent custodians, dates of collection and transfer, case details, and a description of the item. So if a UGC NET question asks, what is the main purpose of chain of custody documentation? Think continuity, identification, accountability, and integrity. Now let's talk about handling. Evidence must be handled appropriately according to its nature. Why? because careless handling can damage, contaminate, or alter evidence. For example, imagine that investigators recover a latent fingerprint bearing objects such as a glass bottle. If the object is handled excessively at the wrong location, investigators themselves could introduce additional fingerprints. Similarly, a delicate trace evidence item may lose particles if it is handled roughly. A digital device may be altered if it is improperly accessed. A fragile document may be damaged by the inappropriate handling. Therefore, the way evidence is handled should be determined by the type and characteristics of that evidence. The objective is to collect the evidence without changing its evidentiary characteristics. This is an extremely important forensic principle. Once evidence has been collected, it needs appropriate packaging. And here's something important: there is no single packaging method for every type of evidence. Different evidence requires different approaches. This packaging is clearly explained in my last video. After packaging comes another important step: sealing. The purpose of sealing is to secure the package and help make unauthorized opening or interference detectable. Imagine that a parcel containing a narcotic sample is being sent to a forensic laboratory. The parcel is properly packaged and sealed. When it reaches the laboratory, the receiving expert checks the condition of the seal. If the seal is intact and corresponds with the relevant identifying information, that provides an important continuity check. Now imagine the opposite: the parcel arrives with a broken seal. Immediately questions arise: when was it broken? Who opened it? Why was it opened? Was the content altered? These questions demonstrate why sealing matters. A judicial example involving forensic samples showed a clear sequence in which samples were collected, sealed with identifying details, produced before the magistrate, forwarded to the forensic laboratory, and received there with the seal intact and identifying particulars consistent with the record. That is a good example of how multiple links work together to establish continuity. Now imagine that evidence has been collected, packaged, and sealed. Does the chain stop there? Absolutely not. The evidence may remain in storage for hours, days, or even longer. That period is still part of the chain of custody. Evidence should be stored securely and under conditions appropriate to its nature. The storage system should minimize unauthorized access, tampering, contamination, loss, damage, and deterioration. For example, consider a digital storage device seized during an investigation. It cannot simply be left on an investigator's desk where anyone can access or modify it. Similarly, fragile physical evidence requires suitable storage conditions. The key question is, can we account for where the evidence was kept and who had access to it? If yes, the chain becomes stronger. Now comes one of the most important parts, that is transfer. Suppose Officer A collects a firearm. Officer A deposits it into secure evidence storage. Later, Officer B is authorized to transfer it to the forensic laboratory. That transfer creates another link. The record should establish who transferred the evidence, who received it, when did the transfer occur, what exactly was transferred, was the passage sealed, what was its condition. The evidence should never simply move from one person to another without accountability. Every significant transfer should be traceable. Think of it as a relay race. The evidence is the baton. If the baton moves from one runner to another, we should know who handled it over and who received it. Otherwise, there is a gap in the race. Transportation is also part of the chain. Suppose a sealed parcel containing soil samples from 3 different locations is being transported to the forensic laboratory. The person transporting the evidence becomes part of the chain. The transport should be secure and documented according to applicable procedure. The evidence should be protected from loss, damage, unauthorized access, tampering, and were relevant environmental conditions that could affect the evidence. The goal is to ensure that the item arriving at the laboratory is the same item that left the evidence store. Now the evidence reaches the forensic science laboratory. This is another important checkpoint. The receiving laboratory personnel may verify exhibit identification, number of parcels, condition of packaging, seal condition, relevant documentation, and other required details. Suppose a package containing 3 suspected narcotic samples reaches the laboratory. The laboratory does not simply open the package and start testing. The receiving process itself is important. The condition of the package and seals can provide evidence about continuity. If the seals are intact and identifying details correspond with the documentation, confidence in the continuity of the exhibit is strengthened. If there is a discrepancy, it should be documented and addressed according to the applicable procedures. Now, many of you may think chain of custody is purely a police responsibility. That is not correct. The forensic laboratory also plays an important role. A forensic scientist must be able to identify what exhibit was received, what condition was it in, what was examined, what examination was conducted, what observations were made, what results were obtained. This is why laboratory records are important. For example, just imagine a forensic document examiner receives a sealed parcel containing a disputed signature. The examiner must be able to establish that the document examined was the exhibit received for that case. The laboratory's documentation, therefore, becomes another important link in the evidentiary. Another most important concept is integrity. Evidence integrity means maintaining confidence that the evidence has not been improperly altered, contaminated, substituted, damaged, or tampered with. Suppose investigators recover 3 small fiber samples from the seat of vehicle. These fibers could potentially help determine whether material was transferred between 2 locations. But imagine that the investigators place fibers from several locations into one unmarked container. Now the laboratory finds several different types of fibers. The problem is obvious. We may no longer know which fiber came from which location. The evidence has lost part of its contextual integrity. Therefore, evidence integrity begins at the crime scene. It does not begin when the forensic scientist switches on the microscope. Let's take another example. Suppose investigators recover 2 separate swabs from 2 different objects at a crime scene. If the same contaminated equipment is used carelessly between the 2 collections, material may be transferred from one exhibit to another. This is called cross-contamination, and it can create a major interpretational problem. The laboratory may produce a scientifically accurate result from the material it receives, but if the material was contaminated before reaching the laboratory, the result may not represent the original condition of the evidence. This teaches us an extremely important principle. A technically perfect laboratory examination cannot necessarily correct poor evidence collection or compromised evidence integrity. Now here's a question that frequently creates confusion. Suppose evidence is collected on Monday, but it reaches the forensic laboratory several days later. Does that automatically mean the chain of custody is broken? No, not automatically. We need to ask, where was the evidence during the delay? Who had the custody? Was it securely stored? Was the seal intact? Was the delay explained? Was the evidence protected from contamination or tampering? So, delay alone does not automatically equal a broken chain, but an unexplained delay combined with inadequate documentation, questionable storage, or uncertainty regarding the integrity of the sample can create serious concerns. There have been cases where unexplained delays in sending forensic samples created concerns about possible contamination and reduced reliability. On the other hand, There are also cases where a delay did not by itself destroy the evidentiary value because the evidence remained properly sealed and continuity was otherwise established. So, remember, delay is a circumstance to be explained, not an automatic verdict on the evidence. Let's look at a case-based example. Imagine that investigators recover several sealed sample packets during an investigation. The samples are properly identified and sealed at the scene. They are produced before the appropriate judicial authority. One sample is then forwarded to the forensic laboratory while another remains in secure custody. When the forensic laboratory receives the sample, the scientific officer checks the package, seal is intact, the identifying particulars correspond with the records. The laboratory examines the sample. Here notice how many links are working together: collection, identification, sealing, judicial custody, forwarding, laboratory receipt, seal verification, examination. This is a strange example of a properly documented chain of custody. Now let's look at the opposite situation. Imagine that forensic samples are collected during an investigation. They are eventually sent to the laboratory, but when the case is examined later, there are significant questions. Who kept the samples after collection? Who transferred them? Where were they stored? Who transported them to the laboratory? Where are the relevant forwarding records? Who can establish that the samples remain secure? If the prosecution cannot satisfactorily establish these links, the court may have difficulty relying upon the forensic findings. This gives us an important lesson. The forensic report alone is not the entire story. The court may also need confidence in the identity and continuity of the material that was examined. Now consider another situation. Suppose a parcel containing a forensic exhibit is sent to the laboratory. The laboratory expert receives the parcel. Before beginning the examination, the expert checks the seal. The seal is intact. The seal corresponds with the identifying information provided with the parcel. The expert records this before opening the package. This seemingly simple step becomes very important. Why? Because the intact seal provides evidence that the parcel received by the laboratory corresponds with the sealed parcel that was dispatched. A judicial example involving forensic examination similarly emphasized that the seal on the parcel received for examination was intact and carried the correct identifying particulars. So remember, the seal is one link in the chain, not the entire chain. Let's list the major situations that can raise concern. Missing documentation. If important transfers are not recorded, the evidence trial becomes difficult to establish. Unidentified handlers. If we don't know who had custody of an exhibit, accountability becomes weaker. Broken or questionable seals. This can raise concerns about unauthorized access or tampering. Unexplained gaps. If there is a period during which nobody can explain where the evidence was, that creates a gap. Improper storage. Poor storage can affect evidence integrity. Evidence identification discrepancies. Different exhibit numbers or inconsistent descriptions can create uncertainty about the identity. Unexplained delays, especially where the nature of evidence makes timely handling important. Possible contamination. If evidence may have been contaminated during collection, handling, or storage, its interpretation may be affected. So the fundamental question is always, can we still confidently establish the identity and integrity of the evidence? Here is another very important point. Students sometimes memorize chain of custody means documentation, but that is incomplete. Documentation is essential. However, chain of custody involves much more. It includes collection, identification, handling, package, sealing, documentation, storage, transfer, transportation, laboratory receipt, examination, and final disposition. So remember, documentation records the chain, but proper collection, handling, storage, and transfer help maintain the chain. Now, let's put everything together. Imagine we recover a firearm from a crime scene. Step 1 is collection. The firearm is properly documented and collected. Step 2 is identification. It is assigned with an exhibit number. Step 3 is packaging. It is packaged properly. Step 4 is sealing. The package is secured and sealed. Step 5 is documentation. The relevant details are protected. Step 6 is storage. The firearm is placed in secure evidence storage. Step 7 is transfer. It is formally transferred to an authorized person. Step 8 is transportation. It is securely transported to the forensic laboratory. Step 9 is laboratory receipt. The laboratory receives and records the exhibit. Step 10 is verification. The condition of the package and seal is checked. Step 11 is examination. The firearms expert conducts the required examination. Step 12 is report. The findings are documented in the forensic report. Step 13 and the last step is court. The evidence and forensic findings may ultimately be presented during judicial proceedings. That entire journey is called the chain of custody. Let's quickly decode it. Collect the evidence, identify the exhibit, pack it appropriately, seal the package, record the relevant details, store it securely, transfer it through authorized custody, receive it at the laboratory, examine it scientifically, report the findings. If you remember this sequence, you will have a strong conceptual understanding of chain of custody. Whenever you get confused about chain of custody, ask yourself these 5 questions. What exactly is the evidence? Who collected, handled, transferred, and examined it? When did each important event occur? Where was the evidence stored or transferred? How was it collected, packaged, sealed, transported, and examined? If these questions can be answered through reliable records and testimony, the evidentiary trial becomes much stronger. Let's quickly revise everything. Chain of custody is the documented chronological history of the possession, handling, movement, storage, and examination of evidence. Its major purpose is to establish continuity, identity, accountability, and integrity. Important components include collection, identification, handling, packaging, sealing, documentation, storage, transfer, transportation, laboratory receipt, examination, and final disposition. Possible concerns include missing records, unexplained gaps, broken or questionable seals, unidentified handlers, improper storage, evidence discrepancies, unexplained details, and possible contamination or tampering. And remember this very important point. What matters is whether the continuity, identity, and integrity of the evidence can still be reliably established. So the next time you hear the term chain of custody, don't simply remember a textbook definition. Imagine that firearm we started with, it was recovered from the crime scene, it was identified, it was packaged, it was sealed, it was documented, it was stored, it was transferred, it reached the forensic laboratory, the seal was checked, the firearm was examined, the findings were reported, and eventually the evidence could be tracked before to its original source. That entire journey is a chain of custody, because forensic science is not only about finding evidence, it is also about proving that the evidence examined today is the same evidence that was collected yesterday. And that is why chain of custody is such an important topic in UGC NET Forensic Science Unit 1. If you found this explanation useful for your UGC NET preparation, please like this video, share it with your fellow UGC NET aspirants, and subscribe to the channel for more detailed lectures on criminology and forensic science. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next lecture. Keep learning, keep revising, and I'll see you in the next forensic science video.